Okay, so let's start with an image. It's December 22nd, 2025. And you have to picture this asset, a floating steel city, almost 1,100 feet long.
Which is what, taller than the Chrysler building if you stood it on its end?
Exactly. 25 stories high, just sitting there in the Caribbean Sea.
And we're not talking about some old diesel ship. This is the USS Gerald R. Ford. It's powered by two A1B nuclear reactors. Our sources point out these things can generate enough power for a city like
Orlando, Florida.
for 20 years without refueling.
Just staggering. And there it is, 100,000 tons of American power, sitting just 150 miles off the Venezuelan coast. And this deep dive is really about understanding the tension of that. It wasn't a hot war. It was a crisis defined by the threat of one. Our sources take us inside this whole Ford crisis, and we're going to look at how power projection works now in the 21st century and the razor's edge we were on, where one decision on that ship could have just ignited the entire hemisphere.
And that's the mission here, right? To unpack that.
Mhm.
Because the carrier, it never travels alone. It is the absolute center of a carrier strike group. And that's a system so huge, it can control, what, 1,000,000 square miles of ocean.
Yeah, the sources use a few terms for this. You hear power projection, which is the military term.
Right.
Then you get gunboat diplomacy for the 21st century from the diplomats. But I like the sailors term. It's the simplest. They just call it showing the flag.
And that's so crucial for you to understand. Just showing up, the act itself provides immense leverage. When you park that much steel on someone's doorstep, you force them to think. You force new calculations. Sometimes the presence is the message.
So, okay, let's get into what forced this thing to turn south in the first place.
Right.
We have to go back a month to November 13th, 2025.
Uh-huh.
The defense secretary, Pete Hegseth, announces a new maximum pressure campaign against the cartel of the Suns. Now, the sources allege this is a group run by high-ranking military officers in Venezuela.
And the accusation is that they're just flooding the U.S. with drugs. But the usual way you'd handle that is, Coast Guard, law enforcement patrols, arrests.
Yeah.
But this is where the whole thing pivots. Hegseth made a key strategic shift. He didn't just call them criminals. He designated the cartel as a foreign terrorist organization, an FTO.
And that one word, that single designation, terrorist.
Yeah.
That was like turning a key in a lock. It opened up a whole new set of rules.
Exactly. That's the strategic move. Because under an FTO designation, the rules of engagement, they shift. You move from civil law to military combat, as one source put it. You don't read Miranda rights to terrorists. You don't serve warrants. You stop them.
By any means necessary.
By any means necessary. So what the administration was doing really was using a legal tool to sidestep international maritime law. You're trading a police badge for a soldier's uniform.
And turning a drug bust into a military op.
Precisely. And so once that happened, the Ford Strike Group gets its orders. Within 48 hours, it's heading south.
For Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro, this has to look like, it's an invasion force.
It's the opening act of an invasion, absolutely. So his countermove is immediate. He goes on state TV, declares maximum alert, calls up the militia, and, this is the critical part, moves his Russian-made mobile missile batteries to the coast.
Making a very clear threat.
An explicit one. He threatened to turn the Caribbean into a graveyard. So suddenly the stage is set. You have this American floating city facing off against very sophisticated land-based Russian weapons designed specifically to kill carriers.
It's easy to get lost in the politics, but inside that 100,000-ton ship are 4,500 people. So what was it like inside the Ford while this geopolitical chess game was playing out?
The sources describe it as just relentless. The ship is running 24/7. You've got jets launching every 90 seconds, and the entire ship just sort of shudders with this controlled violence. The physical stress alone is immense.
But the real pressure, it seems to filter down to the junior folks, right? We're talking about the Combat Direction Center, the CDC.
Yeah, imagine the CDC. It's dark, it's cold, lit only by the blue glow of screens. And you have these 20-year-old radar operators, intelligence analysts making split-second decisions that could literally start a war.
There's a quote from Senior Chief Martinez, a radar operator, that it stopped me cold. He said, every blip on that screen could be a fishing boat, or it could be a missile. You have seconds to decide. And if you're wrong...
And he's not being dramatic. That's the job. That's the reality. And it's on top of all the other existential risks of just being on a nuclear carrier. You lose power, you have a fire in the hangar bay. You could lose $1 billion in aircraft in just minutes.
So the tension is building. And then it turns kinetic. But not with missiles. The goal wasn't war, it was seizure. So let's jump to December 11th around 4 in the morning.
Right. A US MQ-4C Triton drone spots a supertanker, and this drone is key. It's a high-altitude beast, flies above the clouds, gives them perfect clarity on every ship for hundreds of miles. There's nowhere to hide.
And intel confirms this tanker. It's flying a Guyanese flag, but it's loaded with Venezuelan crude oil. This isn't just oil. The Pentagon frames it as a literal bank account for terror, money to pay off loyal generals in Caracas.
And this is the first real test of that FTO designation. Because under normal maritime law, the U.S. Navy stopping a merchant ship, that's piracy. It's an act of war.
But the argument was,
This isn't a merchant ship, it's a financing tool for terrorists. So the order comes down from the Pentagon, take it.
and that leads to the flashpoint. The destroyer USS Gravely breaks off from the group and heads for the tanker.
But a Venezuelan patrol ship immediately moves to intercept.
And it turns broadside, which our sources say is the naval equivalent of drawing your gun.
Oh, absolutely. This is the most dangerous game of chicken you can play at sea. The radios are lighting up with warnings, accusations of breaking international law. But the Gravely, it doesn't slow down. It moves right between the tanker and the Venezuelan ship.
And its 5-inch deck gun is rotating, locked on the Venezuelan vessel.
The distance is closing. 10 miles, 8, 6. If the Venezuelans had fired so much as a warning shot, the rules of engagement would have dictated an immediate, overwhelming response. That's the moment the war starts.
But at 4 miles, they blinked.
They blinked. The Venezuelan ship slowed, its wake just died down, and it turned hard to starboard. They had to weigh that action against the 100,000-ton monster sitting just over the horizon.
Minutes later, U.S. Coast Guard teams board the tanker. The seizure was a huge win for Washington, but it sent shockwaves. Oil prices jumped 4% in an hour. Caracas is screaming state piracy.
And instead of backing off, Washington doubles down. 6 days later, December 17th, President Trump issues a new executive order, a total and complete blockade.
And we need to be really clear here. A naval blockade like that, enforced by a carrier, that is legally defined as an act of war.
It is. The Ford wasn't just showing the flag anymore, it was enforcing a siege. They set up a 200-mile safety zone, and the effect was immediate. Civilian airlines started canceling flights. The Venezuelan skies just went quiet.
This is where the threat really escalates. Intel confirms Russian military advisors on the ground, and that they've unpacked advanced anti-ship cruise missiles at the port of La Guaira, the kind specifically designed to kill carriers.
And the Ford is a marvel, but it is a massive target. A single missile hitting that flight deck, even if it didn't sink the ship, would be a propaganda victory that would echo around the world. The day the American carrier burned.
But the real nightmare, the thing that apparently keeps naval planners up at night, it wasn't the big missile, it was the asymmetric threat. It was swarms.
Correct. The nightmare is saturation. Can your $13 billion warship defend itself against hundreds of small, fast-attack boats? Or, cheap drones that cost maybe $500 each, all launching at the same time?
It's a math problem.
It's a brutal math problem. Can you engage 100 targets at once? The Navy says yes. But computer simulations, they're reportedly a lot less certain.
And while all this is happening on the water, there's a shadow war kicking off on land, enabled by the Ford's presence.
Yeah, this is where the sources get a bit murky. You see blurry photos of black helicopters low over the jungle. Elements of the 160th SR, the Night Stalkers.
You don't send in the Night Stalkers for a training exercise.
No, they could be doing anything. Scouting missile sites, inserting intel assets, deploying electronic warfare. You see these reports of weird power outages at coastal radar stations.
Is it a cyber attack? Sabotage? We don't know. The ambiguity itself is the weapon.
And that intense pressure, that coercion, brings us to the core debate about the supercarrier itself.
Right. The critics say this whole thing was madness, a distraction from the real fight in the Pacific with China. And by seizing tankers, the U.S. was eroding the very rules-based order it claims to defend. We looked like the aggressors.
A valid point on international law. But the supporters, they argued this was long overdue. That a narco state can't just operate freely in America's backyard, and the Ford was there to restore order and remind everyone who controls the oceans.
And that's the paradox of the carrier, isn't it? It's seen as this 20th century relic that's obsolete against cyber and hypersonics, and yet it proved completely indispensable here.
Because its value is almost entirely psychological. The Ford didn't fire a shot. It didn't have to. Its presence forced the calculation in Caracas. The Venezuelan military commanders saw the force, they saw the precision of the intel, the economic pain of the blockade, and they had to ask themselves, is this worth a war with the United States?
And the answer was no. The carrier didn't win a war, it prevented one. It was 100,000 tons of diplomacy.
And it worked. The crisis just fizzled out. January 8th, 2026. The missile batteries were pulled back.
The blockade was quietly lifted. Venezuela agreed to enhanced cooperation, and the Ford sailed north. No shots fired.
So the final synthesis here is that what happened wasn't peace. It was a pause. It was a moment of forced calculation. Both sides stepped back, but the underlying issues, they were never resolved.
And the sources are clear. The Ford will deploy again. These ships exist on that thin line between showing strength and having to prove it.
Which leaves you with the final thought to consider tonight. The Ford is in port now, resting. But somewhere in a secure room in the Pentagon, someone is already looking at a map asking a question. Now that we've shown this works in the Atlantic, what's the next destination? Where is the Ford going next? Because as long as that edge exists, these ships will sail it.